keeps a climate change or an event database called the National Center for Environmental Information, and they record reported events historically. Most of the periods of record go back to the 50s. Some of them only go back to the 90s. It's by no means a totally comprehensive data set, but it focuses on reported incidents and reported damages. It's imperfect, but it's a good source of data when we don't have good records. So we use that. We also use FEMA's list of federally declared disasters, disaster type, and the types of assistance provided. So individual assistance, public assistance, and hazard mitigation. And usually the individual assistance and public assistance give us some dollar amounts that FEMA paid out in various different historical events. So federal disaster declarations are presidentially declared disasters. There's been 13 major disasters declared in Frederick County. 9 of them were for flooding and 4 were for winter weather. And the table shows you what's happened since the last plan update and what types of assistance were made available. I'll point out on this one, because I always like to focus on grants, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which we talked about at the last meeting, has recently been opened up as a result of the COVID pandemic disaster. So a large amount of money in addition to the BRIC program will very soon be available under HMGP as well. And you can do, and it's specifically for resilience, natural hazards. You can do flood mitigation, you can do earthquake, whatever type of mitigation is eligible. Important to understand that. You may think that because it's a pandemic related disaster, it has to be related to public health, but it does not. So you can apply for flood related mitigation projects under that pool of money. Again, loss estimation approaches. We used Hazus for flood, hurricane, wind, and earthquake. It's an improved methodology with improved updated census data. A newer module. Last time, I believe it was done for flood and hurricane wind, but not for earthquake. So we added earthquake this go around. And then for the other hazards, again, we use the NCEI data, flood insurance program losses, reimbursements, downscaling from the state plan. And for some of the more challenging hazards like wildfire, just, historical numbers of reported damages. And we'll briefly run through each of those to give you a feel. For the flood analysis with Hazus, we did runs for the 10 through 500 year events in an annualized run. And that gives you damages by building type, contents inventory, relocation, income, rental, and wage losses, and also calculates debris. So those are all things that were added. We'll start with severe winter weather. Again, just showing that it ranked high in 2016 and 2021. For this one, we have the number of events historically, and this goes back to 1996. So there were 265 reported historic events, property damages of 406,000, crop damages of 208 for total damages of 615. Important to point out, and this is one of the limitations in the NCEI database, these are just reported damages in 2 categories, property or crops. This doesn't take into account snow removal, public works, public safety, all of those expenditures, which I'm sure far exceeded these numbers, but it gives us some type of consistent snapshot. So these are the reported damages from those 265 events. If you annualize them, you can see that physical property and crop damage on any given year ranges from 11,000 annualized for winter storm to 1345 for what's categorized as blizzard. You could probably combine those two, etc. You see how it breaks it out by storm type. So it just shows that there are physical damages on an annual basis for most of these events reported. Similarly, for severe weather, 652 reported events. This goes back to 1955. You can see the damages. I won't go through each and every one of them, but total damages in the range of reported, again, damages $6 million. If you look at the annualized events, you can see in the third column that anywhere from a 75% chance to twice a year in the different jurisdictions. A lot of these are influenced by the reporting. Of course, there's going to be more reporting in the more urbanized areas because there's more people there to report. But again, you can see that at least 50% chance, mostly or higher, of a severe weather event causing damage on an annual basis, with annualized losses, countywide in the $250,000 range from these severe weather events. And that's hail, lightning, down winds, things like that, not the major hurricanes and major storm events. Tornado, again, total of 38 tornadoes since 1950 across the county. These are just some of the touchdowns and track locations. Some of the annualized losses, again, from 1950 through 2021 from the NCEI database. Again, 38 events, $6 million worth of damages, about $86,000 of potential annualized losses across the county from tornado events. Again, keeping in mind that period of record is 71 years. So, and all this money is inflated to current dollars. So, you may not get one for 10 or 12 years, and the next one you get, could be 3 times that annualized number. Hurricane and tropical storm. So for this one, this is hurricane winds specifically from Hazus, and it looks at buildings, contents, inventory, all these different things that the model addresses, including lost wages. And you can see total annualized losses from hurricane winds as calculated by Hazus is about $500,000 per year for the county, and you can see the numbers for the individual jurisdictions, as low as $858 for Burkittsville, $8,000 for Thurmont, etc. So again, annualized. This is, if you were keeping a piggy bank to pay for hurricane damages, this would be kind of a chart to help you figure out how much to save. This is just a map that shows the ranges of annualized total losses by census tract. Extreme heat. Extreme heat is becoming more frequent, intense, and longer. The heat waves are projected by the National Climate Assessment to continue to increase over the next century, and they're supposed to be more intense, while cold waves are predicted to be less intense. So quantifying losses from heat is a challenge, but bringing in the social vulnerability stuff that we kind of just touched on in the last plan, now we can sort of map, like, okay, we know the odds are increasing of longer, prolonged heat waves. Here are some of the vulnerable populations, and here's where you might focus your planning on heat. And you see it's pretty, for the most part, correlates with urban, suburban versus rural. And this only includes 65 years and older, children, single parent households, and disabilities. So there's different things you can probably do with the social vulnerability data, but at least it gives a picture of where to be more concerned about heat problems. For drought, again, as you would expect with heat, drought risk in the summer and fall is projected to increase. Naturally occurring droughts will continue to be part of the climate, even if precipitation does increase. And when we do have droughts, they're projected to be more intense. So again, from the NCEI database, the main risk of droughts is posed to agriculture, obviously. Frederick County is roughly 45% farmland, containing 10% of Maryland's total farmland. There's been 12 reported drought events since 1993. Annualized chance of a drought is about just a little under 50%. And crop damages, again, reported crop damages since 93 have been $40 million. So annualized over that period of record from 93 to 2021, that's about $1.4 million worth of annualized damages from drought in any given year. And this is just a map of the hay and pasture land and cultivated crops. Okay, flooding. As we always do, we looked at the FEMA 100-year floodplains, mapped them, and did an exposure analysis. What buildings and things are in the floodplain? What are they worth based on tax assessment data? Just a general snapshot of exposure, not to be confused with losses. So we did that. I didn't show a table of the exposure just because it's sort of a less meaningful number, because everything you have in the floodplain isn't going to be totally destroyed. There's going to be losses, and that's what Hazus calculates. So we calculated it a bunch of different ways for annualized losses. So this is a comparison of the NCEI reported events versus the Hazus losses. So you can see the annual percent chance, or the annual number of events, the NCEI total damage, and you'll notice that almost always the damages in NCEI are done by county, so you don't get a good picture of the individual jurisdictions. So NCEI tells us, and again, I keep emphasizing reported damages, $1.4 million. Hazus tells us up to $53 million. So you can see some of the disparities in the reported loss data as opposed to what the model does. And just quickly, what the Hazus model does is it looks at national data on building type, building construction, and then it takes the flood prone areas, typically the FEMA flood prone areas, and it intersects them with an aggregated group of types of buildings. So example, X number have a basement, X number have a crawl space, X number are this type, so on and so forth. And it applies a depth to damage calculation. And then it also brings in a calculation for contents and all the other categories to calculate potential losses based on depth of water in buildings. It's imperfect. It trends on the high side. It seems like every time they update the model, the numbers go up. But it's a good way to do a comparison from place to place. And it's currently the best model available to calculate losses for flooding. So that's NCEI versus Hazus. Again, a map just showing the annualized losses by census block. No surprises there. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dano. He's going to run through a discussion of that pluvial or stormwater modeling exercise that we did, and then show you a brief display of some of the results as we're just currently finalizing it this week. So Dano, if you can hear me and unmute yourself, take it away.
Sure thing, Scott, and let me know if you have any trouble hearing me. Hi, everyone. As Scott said, I'm Dano. I'm one of the water resources engineers working on the pluvial modeling. As Scott said, the FEMA results that we looked at earlier mostly focused on riverine flooding, which is flooding from water that floods at the streams, or fills the banks of the streams. But in urban environments, you often have heavy rainfall that causes localized flooding that overwhelms the capacity of local stormwater management, and that's what we're focusing on here. Next slide. So Frederick County, it's about 600 square miles, a very large area, but we were able to build a relatively simple rainfall runoff a pluvial flood model to simulate the potential flooding from these rainfall events. Just had 4 major ingredients: the topography, the land use, which impacted how easily water moved over the surface, we were able to incorporate only major conveyance structures to ensure, for example, that water was able to pass under major bridges or through major culverts. And we're also able to incorporate river inflows from upstream sources. So upstream contributions to the Monocacy River, to the Potomac River, for example. And we took these 4 basic ingredients and we put them into a 2-dimensional HEC-RAS flood model. This is the same model that FEMA uses for their riverine studies, but we were applying it here to the pluvial flood model. And this is an emerging area. I would just say that 10 years ago, we probably couldn't have built this model because we didn't have the topography and we didn't have the computing power. But today, both of those are available, and so we can look more closely at it. What Scott's showing here on the left is a representation of the pluvial flooding across all of Frederick County. You can see areas in blue or where the flooding is simulated. This is for a 100-year, 24-hour rainfall event, dropping about 7 to 8 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. And you can see a zoom in to little Tuscarora Creek here near Frederick City. And you can see that the flooding is represented both in the stream, but also away from the stream in some of the urbanized areas where you have localized ponding and higher potential or risk of pluvial flooding. Next slide. And this slide shows a comparison. On the left, you can see the kind of coverage of the riverine flooding with the FEMA flood maps. On the right, you can see kind of the denser network of stormwater flooding or pluvial flooding that we're able to capture with this modeling. And I'll talk a little more about this in the demo. But I do want to make some key points about limitations and applications of this work. As I said, this is really state of practice. It's an evolving practice. And we're able to do it now just because of developments in data and computing power. Limitations include the incomplete topography. We are not capturing flood walls. We are not capturing small levees. And so there can be some localized effects from that. We have very limited representation of the stormwater management infrastructure. We don't know what's going on in the stream profiles, the stream bathymetry, and there's limited you can do to validate a model of this size and scale. But that said, there is a lot of evidence from other jurisdictions about its usefulness for hazard planning and risk assessment, for mapping riparian flooding at streams with no FEMA flood model, and also for evaluating the potential for this stormwater flooding far away from streams. So I just want to take 2 more minutes to show a brief demo of what this looks like. So if I could take control, Scott, I'm going to share my screen.
Okay. When Dano's sharing his screen too, I'll just add that this, to do a model of this size that incorporates all of the stormwater infrastructure would cost many, many, many times in excess of what the budget was for the hazard mitigation plan. But what this model does is it provides the backbone so that it can be continuously improved on by adding that data as we go. So it's a really cool first step in the process, and we will probably incorporate as mitigation strategies in the plan to identify some funding sources to continue to keep improving this model with each subsequent update.
Great. So what I hope you're seeing is a map of Frederick County, and I can turn on the 100-year FEMA floodplain here. You can see how that's distributed across the county. And then I can turn on what the pluvial flooding, the 100-year, 24-hour storm event pluvial flooding that we simulated. And if we zoom in into an area here near the Monocacy River, you can see, like I showed in the image, you can see a representation of where you are most likely to have more significant pluvial flooding in the urban areas, and also along areas where the FEMA flood mapping was stopped because detailed maps were not drawn. So for example, down here. I'm going to end with kind of case study, so to speak, of the Clover Hill neighborhood. This is a neighborhood where Dewberry did work on a drainage capacity study. We built a very detailed stormwater management model for this area, and we're able to compare the results with this this very large Frederick County model that we've developed here. And so the FEMA flood mapped risk is relatively small for this neighborhood because there's just one small tributary to the little Tuscarora Creek. But the pluvial flood extent extends quite a bit beyond the banks of the river. And through our work in this previous study, we did resident surveys. We got a lot of feedback about the pluvial flooding that they've been experiencing. And there was a pretty good qualitative agreement with the modeling. There were a fair number of residents complaining about flooding in this Fox Hunt Lane area. There was flood complaints in the central area and basement flooding complaints, and also in this autumn leaf lane area. But this example also highlights some of the limitations of the modeling. I mean, there are some false positives here, areas where the model predicted pluvial flooding, but the resident complaints didn't indicate there was a significant flood problem there. There's also, we know there is significant stormwater infrastructure in parts of this neighborhood. For example, under this road here, there's a 4-foot stormwater pipe that's not simulated here. And so we may be somewhat overestimating the flooding that's occurring in this area. And then you can see some sinkholes here with some karstic geology. You know, that's a level of sophistication. I mean, that karstic geology could be affecting the runoff and the flooding, but it's not something that would be simulated in a model like this. So strengths and weaknesses, but as Scott said, we think it provides a lot of information that the county doesn't have, and it's a good starting point for future work.
And also, correct me if I'm wrong, Dano, but we didn't just model the 100-year rain, 24-hour rainfall event. There's several other scenarios included that can be used for different levels of analysis.
Exactly. Yep. So we're finalizing the results like this for also a 12-hour storm and a 6-hour storm, which was maybe. And so you can look at those different scenarios, like you said, and then also different occurrence intervals, and also doing the kind of exposure analysis, kind of a subset, a mini exposure analysis similar to the one that you've been presenting for the other hazards.
Great. We've been talking for a while, so I think maybe this is a good time to open up for questions before we continue with the presentation. Are there any questions on this analysis or any of the previous things that Jade or I have presented? Keep in mind you may be muted. If you want to talk, just click on the microphone.
This is Jack Markey. I'll just start with the applause. I think it's been very useful information. Very excited about what's been done on the Fluvial side. You know, that's, like you say, it's edge of the state of the art right now, but given this foundation for us, given some of the recent experiences back in 2018 and some of the ones as recent as September 1st of this year, you know, this is going to be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, it's I think Jade might have pointed it out earlier, but this is also in terms of mitigation planning. It truly is state of the art. Dewberry's done 86 mitigation plans for over 1,000 jurisdictions, and I've been involved in probably 25 of them, and I can tell you that not a single one of them has a pluvial analysis. So kudos to you all for recognizing a trend in hazards, and may in fact be the first one in Maryland, if not Region 3, to have incorporated something like this. So it's exciting for us too. All right, I'm going to try to go back to sharing my screen. All right, can everybody see my screen again?
Yep.
All right. So was Pluvial. Couple more hazards just to run through. Dam and levee failure. We did a lot more with it this time around than the last. So there are 21 dams in Frederick County. 4 of them are high hazard dams, and there's also one levee. So for, I believe, 8 of them, we had mapping for inundation areas. So the table shows the number of acres in the inundation area, buildings in that area, buildings per acre, and potential exposure. So there's roughly $79 billion worth of real estate in the dam and levee failure areas based on tax data. This map shows the inundation zones in blue. Not super helpful at this scale, but you can zoom in and out of it. So at least we have we have the inundation captured, and we have a snapshot of what's in it. If we had, more time and money, you can take that a step further and turn the exposure into potential losses if we did some exercises with topography and modeling, which were a little outside of this scope, but again, it's sort of building that continuous improvement foundation. Wildfire, one of the more challenging things to quantify losses for. So we had 2 sources of data: county AMS done through remote sensing, and the State Department of Natural Resources. So AMS records that show that a total of 119 events over 6 years of record for an annualized average of 20 events per year, and they had no damage data in terms of dollars. State DNR had a longer period record, 13 years, so a little more than double. They had 382 events total with an annualized number of 29, so fairly consistent. And the cumulative damages, and again, these are reported damages to primarily, I'm assuming, to buildings and personal property. They had $18,000, so annualized 1,452, which is super low, but I think that number is probably an underestimate just based on the limitations with the data. It turns out like this in almost every plan, regardless of where it is. This is just a map of the interface and intermix areas in the county. Again, primarily in the more rural locations in most cases. And then this is, again, exposure analysis within the interface and intermix areas. And interface is where there's urbanized areas or population that butt up against the higher risk wildfire areas, and that risk is determined by slope and vegetation type and other climate factors. And then the intermix is more rural areas where development is kind of sprinkled around within those areas. So again, it just gives number of building footprints in each of those zones versus the total number of building footprints. And I believe we have an exposure analysis table in the plan that shows the dollar damages of what's in those areas. Again, it's super high because they're very big areas, and obviously you're not going to have a whole area burn at once, but it's challenging to do loss estimation for these areas. I believe lastly is karst and land subsidence, also one of the more challenging hazards. This is a rock type and karst areas map that just generally shows the different slightly more vulnerable areas. And this is exposure in those areas, building footprints, total parcels, total parcel value. So see for Frederick City, where there's a lot of those areas, it's a very high total parcel value, and then the average value per exposed building in those areas. I lied, it wasn't the last one. I think this one is earthquake. This time around, we modeled earthquake with Hazus. Last time the budget was smaller, and it's a relatively low threat hazard, or not low threat, but low probability. That's the thing with earthquake. The probability is extremely low, but the potential damages are extremely high when you have an event. But anyways, this time we're able to model it using Hazus. These are by census tract, the annualized total losses. Again, no surprises where the damages are. They're in the more built up areas. And the building content inventory, et cetera, damages. These are all annualized, are displayed here. So the annualized losses, only 120,000 in building, or I guess in all these categories for the unincorporated areas, and you can see the other numbers. They're very low, but it's because the probability is low. So the period, it looks at like 1,000-year events and 500-year events, and that's why the annualized numbers are really low. So lower probability of damage, or lower probability of occurrences, higher damages when they do occur, and it makes the numbers really low when you spread it out over the period of history. It also makes it extremely difficult to get a positive cost benefit ratio if you're applying for a grant. That's why most of the grant programs do not work on the East Coast in terms of doing earthquake type retrofits, because the probability is low and it's just hard to get a positive benefit cost ratio. Landslide. This is a map that from the USGS that shows landslide susceptibility and incidences. I think the threat of landslide in the county is more in isolated areas of very steep, disturbed topography. These are more generalized USGS susceptibility areas based on soil types and slope and a variety of different things. So it's the best available data we have. Encourage you in your reviews to provide more anecdotal data on where these events actually occur. But based on that large scale data, these are the numbers. Again, it's just exposure in this instance. So these are just the value of the real estate that's within those areas. Jade is going to pick it back up and take us through risk analysis next steps in a few more slides, and then we'll open up the questions.
Yeah, so I just wanted to cover what will come next with the risk analysis. So we've done all of the legwork. We have largely all of the sections written up and ready to go. This plan will have annexes to it. So the colleges and university that is included in the plan will have their own annex that it's essentially like a little mini plan, which will include its own hazard identification and risk assessment section. All of the hazards that we just covered were kind of set up as options for the university and the colleges. They took a survey that allowed them to choose which ones they felt were they would face the most risk from. So we used that feedback and also incorporated some human-caused hazards that they felt they were at risk from to develop their individual HIRA sections. So essentially all of the applicable hazards from above that the colleges are at risk from will show all of this data except zoomed in to their campuses. So it really is just kind of like a little mini focused plan that will highlight the relevant aspects of the HIRA that we just went through, but just for the colleges and universities. So now I'm going to take everyone through just a brief overview of what we're going to be moving our focus to as we wrap up the HIRA section. So now that we have finished the HIRA, we can move on to mitigation goals and objectives, and essentially just coming up with our mitigation and climate adaptation strategy. So the HIRA that we just did, that is supposed to inform the rest of the plan. So it will inform the strategy, it will inform any planning that we do in the future. So it's really important to get that foundation. That's why we spend so much time on it, make sure that we're basing all of our future planning off accurate data and assumptions and risk. So the mitigation strategy that we are going to be moving on to develop is where we come up with the individual actions and projects that all of the jurisdictions and the higher education institutions will focus on. So this will start out with identifying what goals we want to set for the next 5 years and beyond for the county, and then following that up with identifying some objectives and then the actions to fall underneath those. Next slide.
As I move on to the next slide, I'll just add to that I mentioned the capability assessment very briefly, but that falls within the risk assessment, and that also informs the mitigation strategies. So, for example, we talk a lot about damages to the built environment that exists, but we also look at the capabilities and look at future development and policies and regulations and actions that may protect that future investments. And so I just wanted to throw in there that the capability assessment is part of this.
So over on the left-hand side of the screen, I've listed out all of the goals that were included in the previous iteration of the plan, so the 2016 plan. They were essentially organized they're organized by kind of theme and hazard type. So there's one specific in there to, karst and flooding, or in land subsidence and flooding, and others are organized by themes like just a general public awareness, evacuation, community-specific needs, critical infrastructure, things like that. So it is very useful to have a very specific idea of what you want to focus on, but we are including a bigger climate piece in this plan, and we thought it would be useful, strategically useful, to kind of hone in on the major areas that we want to focus on and set our goals to be. So our plan that we really want to get your guys' feedback on is to have kind of strategic categories for these goals, and then if these sound okay, then we can develop out specific goals from these, the specific language to match these goals. So essentially all of the goals on the left-hand side would be combined in some ways and basically be represented by 4 broader goals that would be shown on the right-hand side. So you'd have one goal that would focus more on physical mitigation projects. This could be, elevating a building or demolishing a building and reconstructing it, anything that would have a physical aspect to it. These are a lot of the projects, especially that you focus on getting grant money for. Capability and capacity building would be the second goal. Essentially all of these you can get grant money for, but we'd have another one that would focus on capability and capacity building. So this would be enhancing the ability for the jurisdictions to enact some of these projects, to enact some of this mitigation and adaptation actions. You'd have another goal that would focus on the public education and awareness portion. So some of the communication goals that were included in the 2016 plan would fall under here. And then finally, we wanted a forward-looking goal that focused on policy and planning. So this is where we would bring in, future development, and we could really bring in the climate-focused piece. So taking into account future conditions and how we are going to react and plan for those as far as mitigation goes. So this is our proposal for how to handle goals in this updated plan. You would end up having 4 goals. They were a bit broader. The goals from the 2016 plan would not, in any case, just be thrown out the window. They would be integrated into the 4 goals, and in a lot of the cases, they would actually be made to be objectives that would fall underneath the 4 broader goals. And then, so you'd have objectives, several objectives that went underneath each goal, and then we would assign specific mitigation and climate adaptation actions and projects to each of those objectives to really kind of create a roadmap of how we are going to do these actions and projects that will help us achieve our objectives and eventually help us reach our ultimate goals for the coming years. So this is a good chance if anybody has any immediate feedback, if you love it, if you hate it, if there's anything else you wanted to say about the goals, please feel free to unmute and let us know. You know, these are your goals. We want you to be able to stand behind them and really agree with them and want to do some of these projects and everything that would help you achieve them. So go ahead and unmute if you have any comments or concerns.
Hi, this is Todd with the Health Department. I may have missed it. So the purpose of this is to move from goals into strategic categories. And looking at this, is it possible that, for instance, goal H, provide adequate multi-hazard shelters? If we move that over to the right-hand side, is it possible that it could end up in more than one of those categories?
Yeah, so we would ultimately, I'm sorry if the slide didn't make it clear, we would ultimately still have goals. They would just be broader. They would kind of work as a strategic category. And all the goals that are on the left-hand side would, you know, fall under one of these major categories that are in gold, but they would still, we'd still have like a written out goal to go with them. We just want to kind of get the go ahead on these categories before we go and develop out the actual wording for the goals.
I think the direct answer to the question is yes, it's possible that it could fall under multiple categories. My gut reaction is it would be under capability and capacity building, but you could argue that it could fit under public awareness and education, and also probably forward-looking policy and planning.
This, Jack, I think the question that Todd brings up is an excellent point. I mean, sheltering is I would describe it as a tactical thing, not a strategic thing. Our strategic interest is caring for the community's, you know, human service needs. And then under that is, well, there's shelter issues. There are other sets of issues, but yeah, I think that's exactly what we want to go through is check our assumptions here and get the goals broad, and then, you know, use those strategic categories and put them in buckets that we can develop action.
Yeah, and like individual, like where some of these specific goals from the left-hand side would fall would also be determined by the objectives that we would want to have underneath of these. So in the 2016 plan, all of these goals that had objectives, some had, you know, like 3 to 5-ish objectives that would fall under each goal. So those will be incorporated as well. So that'll help determine, you know, where some of these specific points will fall under these broader goals.
And what we're planning to do is take a crack at this, and then when we have the local planning team meetings and our one-on-one meeting with the county to talk through the mitigation strategies, we would give another chance for input and feedback, and until we eventually get them where we want. Also, too, I mean, there's an opportunity if a particular jurisdiction or campus has something very specific to them that isn't as equally important to the rest of the county, there's ways that we can kind of rearrange the goals and objectives for a particular entity. We hope to get buy-in from, so it's kind of regionally consistent across the board. Everybody will have preferences, but this is just a starting point, so you'll have time to opine on it more.
Scott, did you want me to go over the slide? May be having connection issues again, but not too bad of timing because we did reach the next steps here. So basically, we would just want to give you a heads up for what is going to be coming after this. Scott had mentioned we do have the, you know, written out HIRA section that we'll be giving to you guys for review in the coming weeks. So we'll be getting that to you. The public engagement meeting where we'll be going over largely the same stuff that we covered here will be held next week. So we'll have that on the 21st. Wanted to give a heads up that the survey that everyone has been doing a fantastic job of passing around to everyone. That'll be closing out on the 22nd, which I believe is the Friday. Yeah, so next Friday. We will be developing out. We'll be developing out the specific language for the mitigation goals and objectives, and we'll be sending that to everyone for review and feedback. And we'll be getting some more of that feedback when we have those local meetings as well, which will probably be more in the November timeframe. And then after we settle on goals, objectives, then we'll go ahead and work on the overall strategy. So that'll be choosing specific actions, getting buy-in for which jurisdictions want to do which projects and actions and all of that. And then that kind of moves us to the end of the process. We'll be getting that final draft plan more in the November, early December timeframe. We'll be having that workshop that was mentioned initially to go over the draft plan and get feedback. And we'll be doing that big stakeholder push. We'll be talking to neighboring jurisdictions, trying to get them to review the plan, and so we can integrate their input as well as the public's input. We'll hold our final public input meeting to see if they have any questions or feedback or anything that we can further integrate into the final draft. And then we're here to answer any questions that you guys may have for anything that we covered throughout this presentation, or any questions about the project in general. I see there's one in the chat. During the draft plan and workshop, we'll be updating the info we submitted on the templates. The templates, like the handouts that you guys did, is that what that's referring to?
Jade, it was just wanted to make sure when we were updating the templates you provided us to complete, and our teams, assuming most everyone else on this call, everyone submitted those hazard mitigation plan updates in that template form. At what point would you like us to update those into sort of a more formalized report?
Yeah, so all of the questionnaires and templates and everything that we've received, we've used that to update the text that's largely like in the beginning of the plan. So that's like a lot of the profile information, is the capability assessment information. There's like a large capability matrix. So that has been updated. When we do the draft plan review process, we really encourage everyone to do a deep dive at that point. Look out for any of the information that may have changed, or you found some new information you want us to include. So that'll be a great time to really give us all that feedback, make corrections, any of that. And if you come up with anything in the meantime, always feel free to message me if just something pops into your head. I have kind of an ongoing list of things that we're updating, so I can just pop it onto there, so you don't have to feel like you have to wait for the go ahead. You can email me anytime.
Thank you. I know that we all were sort of submitting that template as a rough draft with working notes. And I know we purposely left ours in that draft working notes form so that we could finalize it. I just wanted to make sure we stayed on the task timeline. So thank you.
Yeah, if you want to, anytime you want to update that, you can send it my way. If there's any pieces that we find when we are writing that we're missing in the plan, we've just been kind of highlighting it in yellow. So we'll probably be reaching out any final bits and bobs when we review the draft plan. It'll be highlighted in yellow, so we can attend to those.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Scott, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
I've had a lot of technical difficulties this morning. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, this is Kevin Fox of Mount St. Mary's. Just wondering, will the college and university annexes have the pluvial flooding component as well?
I think the answer is yes. Honestly, we hadn't thought through it yet, but I don't see why not. I think it would be important at that scale that before we publish it, you really review it and make sure that it is accurate on the campus. But other than that, I don't see any reason why not to.
Great, thanks.
The comment I would make, this Jack, to Kevin for some of those issues is, since there aren't some of the, stormwater infrastructure things that you might have constructed as a private entity, not on the maps, that might make your variability on the pluvial model a little higher than, for a unincorporated area, but I think it's still valuable.
Yeah, I think so. Anybody else? All right, well, looks like we're finishing a little bit early. We thank you very much for your time. Feel free to email us any questions. We'll be posting this presentation up with the others. The only thing I'll close on is we have the heaviest lift is over, but we have a lot of work to do in a short amount of time. So when we reach out to you to set up meetings and ask for last minute information, please be as responsive as possible so that we can get this thing to the finish line by the deadline. But so far it's been a great group to work with. We're very pleased with how it's turning out, and we look for, I really do believe that this is going to be one of the more innovative plans in the region. Others are going to be doing the same type of things, but I think we're going to be a little bit out in front of it. So just kind of happy to be a part of that. All right. If there's no further questions or comments, we thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you the next time.